My daughter-in-law was sitting in Atlanta's most expensive restaurant, ordering vintage champagne to celebrate my retirement. She thought she had finally won the war for my fortune, but when the waiter swiped her black card, the machine didn't beep. It flashed 2 words that I had programmed into the system an hour earlier: Protocol 0. In that moment, she realized the confused old man wasn't losing his mind, he was just tightening the noose. Before I show you what happened when she came to my office the next morning screaming for answers, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and please like if you enjoy watching greed get shut down. The scent of white lilies and damp earth still clung to the fibers of my black wool suit. It was a heavy and cloying smell that would forever remind me of the worst day of my life. We had just come from the cemetery, where I had watched my wife, Eleanor, lowered into the Georgia ground. The ride back to the city had been silent, but it was not the comfortable silence of shared grief. It was the tense and suffocating silence of people waiting for a timer to run out. Now, we were gathered in the executive boardroom of Washington & Sons Construction. The air conditioning hummed with a sterile efficiency that felt offensive after the humid warmth of the graveyard. I sat at the head of the long mahogany table. My hands rested on the cool wood. I could see the reflection of my own face in the polished surface. I looked tired. I looked old and looked like a man who had just lost the other half of his soul. To my right sat the empty leather chair where Eleanor had sat for 40 years. She was not just my wife. She was my partner. She was the CFO of this company, and the moral compass that had guided us through 4 decades of building this city. Without her, the room felt lopsided and dangerously unstable. Across from me sat my daughter-in-law, Brenda. She was not mourning. She was vibrating with a restless energy. She wore a black dress that was too tight and too short for a funeral but perfect for a cocktail party. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun that pulled at the skin of her face, giving her a permanent look of surprise or disdain. She was tapping a manicured fingernail against the glass surface of her smartphone. Tap, tap, tap. It was the sound of a predator waiting to pounce. Next to her sat my son, Andre, my only child. He was 48 years old, but in that moment he looked like a terrified child. He was staring down at his hands, which were twisting a paper napkin into shreds. He could not meet my eyes. He had cried at the graveside, but I wondered now if those tears were for his mother or for himself. And then there was my grandson, Trey, 21 years old, and slouched so low in his chair that he was almost horizontal. He had not worn a suit. He wore black jeans and a black t-shirt, and he was currently scrolling through social media with a look of utter boredom on his face. He had checked his watch 3 times during the eulogy. I looked at them and I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. This was my legacy. This was the family I had worked 18-hour days to provide for. I had built skyscrapers and bridges and hospitals so that they would never have to know the feeling of dirt under their fingernails or the ache of a back broken by labor. I had given them everything, and in return, they were giving me nothing but impatience. They were not here to comfort me. They were here to collect. Brenda finally stopped tapping her phone. She placed it face down on the table with a sharp clack. She cleared her throat, and the sound echoed in the large room like a gunshot. "Isaiah," she said, using my first name instead of Dad or Mr. Washington. "We need to talk about the future. The service was lovely, really it was, but life goes on, and business goes on." I did not say anything. I just looked at her. I let the silence stretch out, hoping that maybe, just maybe, shame would step in and stop her. But Brenda had no shame. She reached under the table and pulled out a thick leather folder. She slid it across the table towards me. It moved smooth and fast like a shark through water. "These are the transfer documents," she said, her voice brisk and businesslike. "Andre and I have had our lawyers draw them up. It is all standard procedure, really. Now that Eleanor is gone, it is time to modernize. You are 72 years old, Isaiah. You are tired. You have earned your rest. This paperwork simply transfers the controlling interest of the company to Andre, effective immediately. It also grants him power of attorney over your personal assets, so we can manage them for you. You will not have to worry about a thing." I looked down at the folder. I did not open it because knew exactly what was inside. It was my death warrant, not my physical death, but the death of my independence and the death of my life's work. They wanted to put me out to pasture. They wanted to stick me in a home and sell off the company piece by piece to fund their lavish lifestyles. I looked at Andre. "Son," I said, my voice sounding raspy and strange to my own ears, Is this what you want? Is this what you think your mother would have wanted? Andre flinched. He looked up for a split second and I saw the conflict in his eyes. He was weak, but he was not evil. Not like her. Dad, he mumbled. Brenda says it is for the best. The market is changing. The technology is changing. We just want to protect the legacy. Protect the legacy, I repeated slowly. You want to protect the legacy by pushing out the man who built it. Brenda let out a short, sharp sigh of annoyance. Oh, stop being so dramatic, Isaiah, she snapped. This isn't a Shakespeare play. This is reality. You are an old man. You are stuck in the past. You still use paper blueprints, for God's sake. You are embarrassing us. The board wants fresh blood. They want vision. Andre has vision. And Trey here, she gestured to the boy, who had not looked up once, is the future. We are doing you a favor. We are taking the burden off your shoulders. So just sign the papers. Stop making this difficult. The cruelty of her words took my breath away. She did not see a grieving husband. She saw an obstacle and saw a piece of debris that needed to be swept away, so she could get to the gold underneath. I looked at Trey again. Trey, I said softly, do you have anything to say to your grandfather on the day of your grandmother's funeral? Trey finally looked up. His eyes were blank and glazed over. Huh, he said, pulling one earbud out. Oh, yeah, sorry about Grandma and stuff, but Mom is right. We need the money for the expansion. I got this investment idea for a club in Miami. It is going to be huge, but we need the liquid cash. So if you could just hurry up, that would be cool. There it was. The naked truth. It wasn't about vision. It wasn't about protecting the company. It was about a nightclub in Miami. It was about sports cars, designer clothes, and first-class tickets to nowhere. They were going to strip Washington and Sons down to the copper wiring and leave a hollow shell behind. I felt a strange sensation wash over me. It was not anger. It was not sorrow. It was clarity. Absolute crystal clear clarity. For years Eleanor had warned me. She had told me that our generosity was poisoning them. She had told me that by shielding them from the world we were making them weak. I had always defended them. I had always made excuses. But now, looking at their greedy, impatient faces, I realized she was right. She was always right. I looked at the empty chair beside me again. I could almost feel her hand on my arm. I could hear her voice in my ear. Do what needs to be done, Isaiah. Build it right or do not build it at all. I took a deep breath. The smell of lilies was still there, but now it smelled like a battlefield. I reached out and placed my hand on the thick leather folder. Brenda smiled. It was a cold, triumphant smile. She thought she had won. She thought the old man was folding. She thought the lion had lost his teeth. She reached into her purse and pulled out a heavy gold fountain pen. She held it out to me. Here, she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. Use this. It will make it official. I looked at the pen. It was flashy, expensive, and completely lacking in character. Just like her, I did not take it. Instead, I pushed the folder back across the table. It slid slowly and came to a rest right in front of Andre. I stood up. My knees popped and my back ached, but I stood up straight. I buttoned my jacket and adjusted my cuffs. I looked at each of them in turn. No, I said. The word hung in the air. It was a small word, but it filled the room. Brenda's smile froze. What did you say? She asked, her voice dropping an octave. I said no. I repeated, my voice steady and strong. I will not sign. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not ever. This company was built on sweat and integrity. I do not see a single ounce of either at this table. Brenda stood up too. Her face was turning a blotchy red. You can't do this, she screeched, losing all pretense of civility. We have the votes. The board is on our side. If you don't sign, we will have you declared incompetent. We will drag you through the courts. We will ruin you, Isaiah. Do you hear me? We will ruin you. I looked at her and I felt nothing. The love I had tried to force myself to feel for her was gone. The hope I had held for my son was gone. There was only the mission now, the mission Eleanor had left me. You can try, Brenda, I said quietly. You can certainly try. I turned my back on them before she could scream another word. It was the most difficult physical action I had ever taken. Every instinct in my body as a father screamed at me to turn around, to hug my son, to beg him to see reason, to write the check and buy the peace just one more time. That is what I had done for 40 years. I had paved the road for them with gold bricks, and then wondered why they never learned to walk on gravel. But Eleanor was gone. The buffer was gone. And standing there in that cold boardroom, I finally understood that my love had become their crutch. If I wanted to save them, I had to break them. I walked toward the heavy double doors. I moved with a slow, deliberate pace. I could feel their eyes boring into my back, and could hear Brenda sputtering behind me, trying to find the words to stop me. "You walk out that door, Isaiah, and you will regret it," she yelled, her voice cracked with desperation. "You will die alone. Do you hear me? Alone." I paused with my hand on the brass handle. I did not turn around, and did not offer them the satisfaction of seeing the single tear that had escaped my eye. I simply pushed the door open and stepped out into the hallway. The heavy door clicked shut behind me. The sound was final. It severed the room from the rest of the world. It severed my past from my future. The hallway of the executive floor was lined with framed photographs, black and white images of the early days. Me and Eleanor standing in the mud at our first sight. The two of us cutting the ribbon on the community center. Andre as a baby sitting in a wheelbarrow laughing at the camera. I walked past them all. I could not look at them. Not today. Those memories were sharp shards of glass now, and I had to keep moving if I wanted to survive. My assistant was sitting at her desk outside the boardroom. She was a kind woman named Sarah who had been with us for 15 years. She looked up as I approached. Her eyes were red-rimmed. She had loved Eleanor too. "Mr. Washington," she said softly, "can I get you anything? Do you need the car brought around?" I stopped at her desk. I looked at this woman, who was not my blood, but who had shown me more loyalty in a decade than my own family had shown me in a lifetime. "No, thank you, Sarah," I said. "I am going to take a walk, but I need you to do something for me." "Anything, sir," she said. "I need you to cancel my meetings for the rest of the week. All of them. Tell the board I am taking personal leave. And Sarah, whatever calls come in from that boardroom in the next hour, you transfer them to legal. Do not put them through to me. Do not let them abuse you." She nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes. She knew. The staff always knew. "Yes, sir," she whispered. "I will handle it." I walked to the elevator bank at the end of the hall. I pressed the call button and watched the numbers light up. 24, 23, 22. It felt like a countdown. When the doors slid open, I stepped inside the mirrored box. I was alone. Finally alone. I watched the doors slide shut, squeezing out the view of the office I had built. The moment the seal was complete, I pulled my phone from my pocket. My hands were shaking slightly, a tremor of age and adrenaline. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I needed. Julian Thorne. He answered on the first ring. He was expecting the call. He had been at the funeral, standing in the back watching the sharks circle. "Isaiah," he said. His voice was deep and calm like a foundation stone. "Is it done?" I leaned my head back against the cool metal wall of the elevator. I closed my eyes. "It is done, Julian," I said. "They did exactly what we thought they would do. They didn't even wait for the dirt to settle on the grave." I heard Julian let out a heavy sigh on the other end of the line. "I am sorry, my friend. I was hoping we were wrong. I was hoping grief would change them." "Grief doesn't change people, Julian," I said, my voice hardening. "It reveals them, and I have seen enough." "So, what are your instructions?" Julian asked. I took a deep breath. I pictured Brenda's smug face. I pictured Trey's boredom, and pictured Andre's cowardice. I imagined the credit cards in their wallets, the accounts they drained every month, the cars they drove, the house they lived in. All of it flowed from one source: me. "Execute Protocol 0, I said. There was a pause on the line. A heavy, pregnant pause. Protocol 0 was a nuclear option. It was a failsafe we had designed years ago for a worst-case scenario. It was a complete and immediate freeze of all discretionary family trust expenditures. "Protocol 0, Julian repeated to confirm. "That means everything, Isaiah. The credit cards, the monthly stipends, the club memberships, the house staff. It all stops. Today. Right now." "Right now," I said. "Cut the line, Julian. Turn off the tap. Let's see how long they last when the water runs dry." "Understood," Julian said. "I am logging into the Trust Administration portal now. By the time you get to the lobby, their cards will be nothing more than colorful pieces of plastic. But, Isaiah, be ready. The backlash will be severe. When you take a bone from a dog, it bites. Let them bite, I said. I have tough skin. Just make sure the assets are locked down. And Julian, one more thing. Yes, Isaiah, meet me at the safe house in an hour, the one in Buckhead, and bring the package. The one Eleanor gave you. I will be there, Julian said. I hung up the phone just as the elevator chimed for the lobby. The doors opened, and I stepped out into the marble atrium of my building. The security guard nodded to me as I passed. The receptionists smiled. They saw the CEO. They saw the powerful man. They didn't know that the man walking past them had just declared war on his own blood. I walked out through the revolving doors and into the humid Atlanta afternoon. The sun hit my face, but I didn't feel warm. I felt a cold, grim satisfaction. The first domino had been tipped. The game had begun. The war I had just declared on the sidewalk of downtown Atlanta had not truly begun in the elevator or even in the boardroom. It had begun 3 days earlier in the suffocating silence of my own home. The house that I had built with my own hands for Eleanor and me was usually filled with music and the smell of her cooking. But in the days leading up to the funeral, it had become a mausoleum. The mirrors were covered and the curtains were drawn. The silence was so heavy it felt like it was pressing against my eardrums. I had spent those days wandering from room to room like a ghost haunting his own life. I touched the back of her favorite armchair in the living room. I ran my hand along the cold granite of the kitchen counter, where she used to roll out biscuit dough on Sunday mornings. But I had avoided one room, her study. It was her sanctuary, a place of books and ledgers and quiet contemplation. Going in there felt like an intrusion. It felt like accepting that she was never coming back to sit at that desk again. But on that Tuesday afternoon, the grief became a physical thirst. I needed to feel her presence. I needed to smell her perfume. So I pushed open the heavy oak door and stepped inside. The room was exactly as she had left it. Her reading glasses were perched on top of a stack of invoices. A half-finished cup of tea sat on a coaster. The liquid inside evaporated, leaving only a brown ring. The air was thick with dust motes dancing in the single beam of light that cut through the curtains. It smelled of lavender, old paper, and the faint, sharp scent of the ink she used in her fountain pens. I walked to the bookshelves that lined the wall. Eleanor had loved to read. She read everything, from romance novels to dense treatises on structural engineering. She wanted to understand my world, so she had learned the language of load-bearing walls and tensile strength. I reached out to touch the spine of a large, leather-bound book on Southern architecture. It was a first edition I had bought for her on our 30th anniversary. My hand was shaking more than I realized. As my fingers brushed the leather, I fumbled. The heavy book slipped from the shelf, tumbled to the floor, landing with a dull thud that echoed in the quiet room. I swore softly under my breath. I was a clumsy old man breaking things in a shrine. I bent down to pick it up, my knees popping in protest. I reached for the book, but as my hand closed around it, my eyes caught something. It was a shadow, a line of darkness on the hardwood floor that shouldn't have been there. I froze. I was a builder. I had laid the floors in this house myself 45 years ago. I knew every plank, every nail, and every knot in the wood. I knew that these floorboards were white oak. They had been tongue and grooved to fit together so tightly that you couldn't slide a piece of paper between them. But right there, underneath the heavy shadow of her mahogany desk, one of the boards was slightly askew. It was raised perhaps a fraction of an inch on one side. It was a detail that no one else would have noticed. Brenda would have walked over it in her high heels without a glance. Andre would never have looked down long enough to see it. But I saw it. It bothered the craftsman in me. I shifted my weight onto my knees, ignoring the ache in my joints. I pushed the book aside and pressed my thumb against the raised edge of the wood. It moved. The board dipped slightly under my pressure, then sprang back up. It wasn't just loose. It was a mechanism. My heart began to beat a little faster. It was a strange, erratic rhythm in my chest. I looked around the empty room as if expecting Eleanor to be standing there with a finger to her lips. But I was alone. I dug my fingernails into the seam and pulled. The board offered a moment of resistance and then came away with a soft groan of wood on wood. It hadn't been nailed down. It had been cut and fitted to look permanent, but it was a lid. I set the piece of oak aside and leaned forward, peering into the darkness beneath the floor. There was a cavity there, a small square space nestled between the floor joists. It was lined with black felt that had grayed with age, and sitting in the center of that hidden nest was a box. It was not a jewelry box. It was not a metal lockbox. It was a simple box made of aromatic cedar. The kind you might keep cigars or keepsakes in. It had no markings, no name, no date. It was just a smooth wooden container that had been hiding beneath my feet for God knows how long. I reached down and lifted it out. It was heavier than I expected. It felt dense. It felt significant. I sat back on my heels, the box resting on my thighs. The smell of cedar wafted up, mixing with the lavender scent of the room. It was a smell of preservation, a smell of secrets kept safe from the rot of time. I ran my hand over the lid. The wood was cool and smooth, polished by the oils of someone's hands. Eleanor's hands. How many times had she knelt here just like this? How many times had she lifted this box out of the dark to check on its contents? I felt a sudden wave of fear. We had no secrets. That was our rule. We talked about everything. The business, the money, the boy. If she had hidden this from me, it had to be something terrible, or something so precious she couldn't bear to share it. I took a deep breath, holding it in my lungs until they burned. I had to know. I flicked the small brass latch on the front of the box. It clicked open with a sharp sound. I lifted the lid. Inside the box was lined with faded blue velvet. Lying on top was a bundle of 3 items. The first was a hospital bracelet. The plastic was yellowed and brittle with age. It was tiny, a bracelet for a newborn. I squinted at the typed letters on the insert. Baby boy, Washington, the 14th of August, 1976. Beneath the bracelet was a lock of hair. It was dark and fine, tied with a blue satin ribbon. It looked like spun silk. I touched it gently with my calloused finger. It was so soft it was almost non-existent, and beneath the hair was a thick cream-colored envelope. It was sealed with red wax. On the front, in Eleanor's beautiful flowing script, was a single word. My hands began to tremble violently. The world outside the study ceased to exist. There was no company, no funeral, no greedy daughter-in-law. There was only me. And this box and the message my dead wife had left for me from beyond the grave. I picked up the envelope. The paper felt thick and expensive. It felt heavy with a truth I was not sure I was strong enough to carry. But I was Isaiah Washington. I had built foundations in swamps. I had weathered recessions and storms. I could weather this. I broke the wax seal. The paper unfolded with a crisp crinkling, sound that seemed too loud in the quiet room. The ink was blue and the handwriting was steady and elegant. It was the same script I had seen on birthday cards and grocery lists for 50 years. But the words on this page were not mundane. They were a confession written by a ghost. "My dearest Isaiah," the letter began. "My love, my rock. If you are reading this, then I am gone. And if I am gone, then I can no longer protect you from the truth I have carried in my heart for 48 years. Please, my love, try to forgive me. I did not do it out of malice. I did it out of a grief so blinding that it shattered my reason." I sat down hard on the floor. The strength had left my legs. I leaned my back against the heavy oak desk and brought the paper closer to my eyes. "You remember the day our son was born," she wrote. "August 14th, 1976. It was the hottest day of the year. You were pacing in the hallway, terrified and proud. You had already called your father. You had already bought the cigars. But inside that room, Isaiah, my world was ending. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I remembered that day. I remembered the joy. I remembered the nurse handing me a bundle and telling me I had a healthy baby boy. I never knew. I never suspected. Our son," she continued, "our little Isaiah Jr. He was born with a weakness in his lungs. The doctors tried everything, but he was too small. He lived for only 2 hours. I held him as he took his last breath. I watched the light go out of his eyes. And in that moment, I knew I could not survive telling you. I knew it would break you. You wanted a son so badly. You had built an entire future in your mind for him." I stopped reading. I looked up at the ceiling, trying to blink back the tears that were blurring my vision. My son, my blood. He had died before I ever held him. The grief was fresh and sharp as if it had happened this morning. I forced myself to look back at the page. "There was a young girl in the next bed," she wrote. "Her name was Sarah. She was 17, a runaway. She had given birth to a healthy, strong boy an hour before me. But she was terrified. She had no money, no home, no family. She was crying because she knew she could not feed him. She was going to give him up to the state." The next paragraph was stained with a single dried tear mark. The ink was slightly smudged. "In my madness, Isaiah, I made a choice. I offered to help her. I gave her the money I had hidden in my purse. I promised her that her son would have a life of privilege, a life of love, a father who would move mountains for him, and she agreed. We swapped the bracelets, we swapped the records. It was chaos in the ward that night and nobody noticed. I took her healthy baby boy and I raised him as our own. I named him Andre. The world tilted on its axis. Andre, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the man I had walked through the job sites, the disappointment sitting in my boardroom right now, waiting for me to die. He was not my son. He was a stranger. He was a cuckoo bird laid in my nest by a desperate girl and a grieving mother. I have loved Andre, she wrote. I truly have. But I have also watched him. I have watched the way he moves through the world with an entitlement he did not earn. I have seen the weakness in him that comes from never having to fight for anything. And worst of all, I have seen who he married. Here the handwriting became sharper. The loops of the letters were jagged with anger. Brenda is a vulture, Isaiah. She does not love him and she certainly does not respect you. She sees our legacy as a bank account and has been waiting for me to die so she can pick the bones of this family clean. I have tried to keep the peace. I have tried to protect Andre from her influence. But he is weak. He will do whatever she says. And if you leave the company to him, she will destroy it. She will sell off every brick and beam to fund her vanity. I cannot let that happen. I cannot let the work of your life be destroyed by strangers. And that is what they are, Isaiah. Strangers, you owe them nothing. Not your blood, not your sweat, not your legacy. The letter ended with a plea. I have left instructions with Julian. I have given him the means to find the truth. There is another way, Isaiah. A way to set things right. Please forgive me for the lie. But do not let the lie become your legacy. Protect what is yours. Love always. Eleanor. I let the pages fall into my lap. I sat there for a long time, listening to the silence of the house. 48 years. My entire life as a father had been a performance based on a script I didn't know I was reading. I thought about Andre. I thought about the disconnect I had always felt with him, the way he never seemed to understand the passion I had for the work, the way he looked at a building and saw dollar signs while I saw shelter and community. I had always blamed myself. I thought I had failed to teach him. I thought I had been too hard on him or too soft, but now I knew. We were different species. He was not of my blood. He did not share the fire that burned in my belly. A strange emotion began to rise in my chest. It wasn't anger at Eleanor. How could I be angry at a woman who had swallowed such pain just to spare me? It wasn't even anger at Andre. He was just a pawn in a game he didn't know he was playing. No, it was relief. It was a cold, hard, absolute relief. For years, I had felt guilty about my hesitation to hand the company over. I had felt like a tyrant holding on to power because I didn't trust my own son. But my gut had been right all along. My instincts had been screaming at me that he was not the one. And now I knew why. I looked at the box again. The lock of hair, the bracelet. My real son was gone. But his memory was pure. He had not grown up to be a weak, greedy man. He had died innocent. And Eleanor had given me a final gift. She had given me the truth. I was free. I stood up. My legs felt steady now. The trembling in my hands had stopped. I carefully folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. I put the lock of hair and the bracelet back into the velvet-lined box. I tucked the envelope inside my jacket pocket against my heart. The grief was still there, but it had changed shape. It was no longer a fog blinding me. It was a fuel. Brenda and Andre were waiting for me to break. They were waiting for the old man to crumble. They thought they were dealing with a grieving widower who would sign anything to make the pain go away. But they were wrong. They were dealing with a man who had just lost his family twice in 1 week. And a man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous man on earth. I checked my watch. 40 minutes had passed. Julian would be waiting at the safe house. I picked up the cedar box. I would not leave it here. It was the only piece of real history I had left. I walked out of the study, and I didn't look back. The house felt different now. It wasn't a home anymore. It was just a building, and I knew exactly how to dismantle a building. I walked to the front door. I set the alarm. I locked the deadbolt. I walked to my car, a vintage black sedan that Andre had been pestering me to sell for years. I got in and started the engine. The rumble of the motor felt good. It felt real. I pulled out of the driveway and turned onto the main road. I did not head back toward the office. I headed north, toward Buckhead, toward the truth. Eleanor had mentioned instructions. She had mentioned a way to set things right. I didn't know what that meant yet, but I trusted her. Even in death, she was still guiding me. She was still my partner. As I drove, I thought about Brenda's face in the boardroom. I thought about her threat to ruin me. I allowed myself a small, grim smile. She had no idea what was coming. She was playing checkers and Eleanor had just set up a chessboard. I pressed my foot down on the accelerator. It was time to make the first move. The heavy iron gates of the Buckhead estate swung open with a low mechanical hum. This was not Julian's home. It was what he called the vault. It was a private townhouse tucked away behind a veil of century-old oaks, where he conducted business that required absolute discretion. I steered the sedan up the long driveway. The gravel crunched beneath my tires like the sound of bones breaking. I parked next to Julian's silver luxury coupe and killed the engine. The silence that filled the car was heavy. It was the silence of a man who had just discovered that his entire life was a fiction. I grabbed the cedar box from the passenger seat. I walked to the front door. It opened before I could knock. Julian stood there. He was a tall man with silver hair and eyes that had seen every variety of human greed and betrayal. He did not smile. He simply stepped back and ushered me inside. The interior was dark, smelled of leather and expensive scotch. We walked into his library. He poured 2 glasses of amber liquid and slid one across the heavy desk toward me. "Drink," he said. "You look like you have seen a ghost." "I have seen worse than ghosts, Julian," I said. "I have seen the truth." I placed the cedar box on the desk. I opened it. I took out the letter and the lock of hair. Julian put on his reading glasses. He picked up the pages Eleanor had written. I watched his face as he read. Julian was a man of stone. In 30 years, I had never seen him flinch. But as his eyes scanned Eleanor's confession, I saw his jaw tighten. I saw a flicker of genuine pain cross his features. He finished reading and placed the pages gently back on the desk. He took a long sip of his drink. "She carried this alone," he said softly. "All these years, she carried this mountain alone." "She was protecting me," I said. "She thought I was too weak to handle the loss. So, she gave me a replacement. She gave me Andre." Julian looked at me. His eyes were sharp now. The lawyer was back. The friend had stepped aside. "And now we have a problem, Isaiah," he said. "A massive legal and biological problem. If Andre is not your blood, then the trust structure is invalid. But more importantly, if he is not your son, then we have been handing the keys to the kingdom to a stranger." He picked up the yellowed hospital bracelet from the box. He turned it over in his fingers. Then he looked at me with a strange intensity. "Isaiah," he said, "I need to tell you something. Eleanor came to me 2 weeks ago. She didn't show me this letter, but she gave me a new will, and she asked me to do something very specific. She asked me to hire a private investigator. She wanted me to look into the records of a woman named Sarah Daniels, the woman mentioned in this letter." My heart skipped a beat. "Sarah Daniels, the mother of the boy I raised. And," I said, "what did you find?" Julian leaned forward. He lowered his voice even though we were the only 2 people in the house. "I found discrepancies, Isaiah. Eleanor wrote that your biological son died. She believed that. The doctors told her that. But when my investigator pulled the old hospital archives from the basement of Magnificent Mercy Hospital, we found something else. There was no death certificate issued for a baby boy Washington on that date. The room seemed to spin. I gripped the edge of the desk. "What are you saying, Julian?" "I am saying that in 1976, record-keeping was messy. Adoptions were often informal and sometimes illegal. The records show that Sarah Daniels left the hospital with a baby, and Eleanor Washington left with a baby. But the logs suggest that the baby Sarah Daniels took was not the one she gave birth to." I stared at him. My mouth was dry. "You mean he is alive? My son, my real son. He is alive." Julian nodded slowly. "It is a strong possibility, Isaiah. A very strong possibility. I have a lead. A name. The boy was put into the foster system a year later when she couldn't cope. He bounced around. He had a hard life, Isaiah, but he survived. His name is Darius King." Darius King. The name felt heavy in my mouth. It felt real. "Find him," I said. My voice was a growl. "Find him, Julian. I don't care what it costs. I don't care who you have to bribe. Find him. I already have a team on it, Julian said. But first, we have to deal with the immediate threat. We have to deal with Andre and Brenda. We have to cut the cord. He tapped his computer keyboard. The screen glowed with a blue light. Protocol 0 is active, he said. I just received confirmation from the bank. The accounts are frozen. The credit cards are dead. The monthly stipend transfer that was scheduled for tomorrow morning has been canceled. I felt a cold, grim satisfaction. Good, I said. Let them feel the cold. Across town, the sun was setting over the city. In the trendy district of Buckhead, the streetlights were flickering to life. Inside, the most expensive French restaurant in the city, Brenda and Andre were finishing a meal that cost more than most people made in a month. They were celebrating. They were toasting to the future, to my retirement, to the money they thought was already theirs. Brenda was laughing. It was a loud, shrill sound that made the other diners turn and look. She waved for the waiter. Her diamond bracelet sparkled in the candlelight. Check, please, she called out, snapping her fingers. And bring us another bottle of the Cristal. To go. The waiter, a young man with tired eyes, bowed and hurried away. Andre looked nervous. He always looked nervous when she spent money like this. Babe, he said, maybe we should slow down. Dad hasn't signed the papers yet. Brenda rolled her eyes. Oh, shut up, Andre. He will sign. He is a broken old man. He walked out of there today because he knows he is beaten. By tomorrow morning we will have power of attorney. And then, she smiled a predatory smile. Then we can finally buy that vacation home in Street Barts. The waiter returned. He did not have the champagne. He held a small black leather folder. He looked uncomfortable. He leaned down and whispered to Brenda, "Ma'am, I am so sorry, but your card was declined." Brenda froze. Her smile vanished. She snatched the folder from his hand. "That is impossible," she hissed. "Run it again. It is a black card. It doesn't have a limit." "I did run it, ma'am," the waiter said, his voice trembling slightly. 3 times. The system says. It says the account has been suspended by the issuer. Referred to owner. Brenda's face turned a shade of purple that matched the expensive wine in her glass. Suspended. She looked at Andre. "Give me your card," she snapped. Andre fumbled for his wallet. He pulled out his platinum card and handed it to the waiter. The waiter walked away. He was back in 30 seconds. He shook his head. "I am sorry, sir. This one is blocked too." The silence at the table was deafening. People were starting to stare. The manager was walking over, his face stern. Brenda looked at the card in her hand as if it had turned into a snake. "What is going on, Andre?" she whispered, her voice rising in panic. "Why are the cards blocked?" "I don't know," Andre stammered. Maybe it's a fraud alert. Maybe the bank made a mistake. Or maybe," Brenda said, realizing the truth as the blood drained from her face, "maybe the old man isn't as broken as we thought." The manager arrived at the table. He crossed his arms. "Is there a problem here, folks?" he asked, his voice loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "Because if you cannot pay, I will have to call the police." Brenda looked around the room. She saw the judgment in the eyes of the socialites she so desperately wanted to impress. For the first time in her life, she was not the queen of the ball. She was just a broke woman with a declined card and a table full of empty bottles she couldn't afford. The first domino had fallen, and it had landed right on her ego. The ride home was a quiet nightmare for my son and his wife. They had to scrape together cash from the bottom of Brenda's designer purse to pay the cab driver because their Uber account was linked to the dead credit card. The driver had looked at them with suspicion as they counted out crumpled bills and loose change in the back seat of his worn-out sedan. They were dressed like royalty, but they were paying like paupers. It was a duality that Brenda could not stomach. They walked into the foyer of the sprawling Buckhead mansion I had bought for them as a wedding gift. It was a house that was far too big for 3 people. It had 6 bedrooms and 7 bathrooms, and a garage full of cars that they could no longer put gas in. The moment the front door clicked shut, the silence broke. Brenda didn't just walk in. She stormed in. She threw her clutch purse against the marble floor with a violent scream. It skidded across the polished stone and hit the baseboard with a loud crack. "Fix it, Andre," she screamed. Her voice echoed off the high ceilings. "Fix it right now. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was?" The manager looked at me like I was a criminal, like I was common trash. Andre stood by the door. He looked defeated. He looked small. "I will call the bank in the morning, babe," he said, his voice trembling. "It has to be a mistake. You know how the fraud algorithms are. We made a lot of big purchases for the funeral. It probably just triggered a security hold. Do not give me excuses, Brenda spat. She walked over to the hall table and swept a vase of fresh flowers onto the floor. The glass shattered. Water and stems went everywhere. Give me results. Go to the computer. Log in. I want to see the numbers. I want to know why my card was declined in front of half the social registry of Atlanta. Andre hurried into the living room. He opened his laptop on the coffee table. His hands were shaking so badly he mistyped his password twice. Brenda stood over his shoulder like a hawk. Her breathing was jagged and loud. She was not worried about money. She was worried about status. To Brenda, money was just the fuel that kept her image alive. Without it, she was just a mean woman with expensive taste and no talent. I watched the screen spin, Andre muttered. Come on, come on. The screen finally loaded, but it did not show the balances. It did not show the investment portfolios or the monthly allowance transfer. It showed a single red box with white text. Account suspended. Contact administrator. Andre stared at it. He blinked. That is weird, he said. It says suspended. It doesn't say fraud alert. It says suspended. What does that mean? Brenda demanded. She shoved him aside and leaned in closer to the screen. Who is the administrator? Dad is, Andre whispered. Dad is the administrator of the primary trust. Brenda stood up straight. She let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a sound of pure disbelief. Your father, she said. Of course. The old fool. He probably forgot to sign the renewal papers. He has been so spacey lately. All that talk about grief and legacy. He probably let the insurance lapse, or forgot to authorize the quarterly transfer. She began to pace the room, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. It was a nervous rhythm. She was trying to convince herself that this was incompetence, not malice. She could not conceive of a world where I would actually cut them off. In her mind, I was a permanent fixture, a golden goose that would never stop laying. He is losing it, Andre, she said. I told you at the funeral. He is slipping. He walks out of the meeting today without saying a word, and now this. He is forgetting to pay the bills. He is a liability, Andre. A dangerous liability. Andre looked at the shattered vase on the floor. I don't know, Brenda, he said softly. He seemed pretty sharp in the boardroom. The way he looked at me, it didn't feel like he was confused. It felt like he was angry. He is grieving, Brenda snapped, dismissing his concern with a wave of her hand. Grief makes people do stupid things. It makes them forgetful. It makes them irrational. That is why we need that power of attorney. We need to take control before he accidentally bankrupts us all. She stopped pacing. She turned to face him. Her eyes were hard and cold. There was no love in them. There was only calculation. We are going to see him tomorrow, she said. We are not waiting for the lawyers to draft a new email. We are going to his office first thing in the morning. We are going to put that paper in front of him, and you are going to make him sign it. You are going to tell him that he messed up, that he embarrassed us. You are going to guilt him, Andre. You are going to use your mother's death. You are going to tell him that stress is killing him and that he needs to let go. Andre looked down at his hands. I don't know if I can do that, he whispered. You will do it, Brenda hissed. Unless you want to go back to that restaurant and wash dishes to pay off our tab. Unless you want to lose this house. Unless you want Trey to get kicked out of college because the tuition check bounced. Is that what you want? No, Andre said. No, I don't want that. Then you will make him sign. She walked past him toward the stairs. She stepped over the broken glass without looking down. Clean this up, she said over her shoulder, and fix the car situation. I am not taking a cab to the office tomorrow. I am going in style. I could imagine Andre sitting there in the ruins of his living room, long after she had gone to bed. He was trapped. He was trapped between a wife who despised him and a father he thought he knew. He stared at the red warning on the laptop screen. Account suspended. He thought it was a glitch. He thought it was a mistake. He had no idea that it was a judgment. They went to sleep that night believing that the sunrise would bring a solution. They believed that they could walk into my office and bully a senile old man into submission just like they had always done. They slept the sleep of the arrogant. But while they slept, I was awake. I was sitting in the dark of the safe house with Julian. We were looking at a dossier that contained the name of a young man named Darius King, and we were preparing for the sunrise too. But our sunrise was going to look very different from theirs. Theirs would bring a contract. Ours would bring the apocalypse. The sun rose over Atlanta with a burning intensity that promised a sweltering day. While Brenda and Andre were likely screaming at bank tellers or frantically refreshing their online accounts, I was doing something I had not done in years. I was putting on my work boots. They were old and scuffed with the red clay of a dozen job sites. They were the boots of a man who built things, not a man who simply owned them. I grabbed my yellow hard hat from the hook in the garage. It was scratched and faded, but it fit my head better than any crown ever could. I did not drive to the glass tower downtown where my office sat in the clouds. I drove to the heart of the city, to the massive excavation pit of the Midtown project. It was the biggest contract Washington and Sons had ever landed. A 60-story residential tower that would redefine the skyline. It was also the place where Julian told me I would find him. Darius King. The name had been echoing in my mind all night. I had stared at the photo in the dossier Julian gave me. It was a grainy ID badge photo, but the eyes were familiar. They were my eyes. They were the eyes of a young man who was hungry and focused. But a photo is just ink on paper. I needed to see the man in the flesh. I needed to see if he was made of the same steel that I was. I parked my sedan near the construction trailers and walked toward the perimeter fence. The noise hit me first. It was a symphony of chaos. The rhythmic pounding of pile drivers, the shrill beep of reversing trucks, the shouting of men trying to be heard over the roar of diesel engines. To most people it was just noise. To me it was music. It was the sound of progress. It was the sound of a city growing out of the mud. I swiped my master key card at the turnstile and walked onto the site. Nobody stopped me. I was just an old man in a hard hat. Most of the crew were subcontractors who didn't know my face. They just saw another gray-haired supervisor inspecting the work. I walked slowly, navigating the maze of rebar and concrete forms. I kept my head down, but my eyes were scanning every face. I was looking for him, and then I saw the commotion. Near the north wall of the foundation pit, two massive flatbed trucks were gridlocked. A delivery of steel beams had arrived at the same time as a convoy of concrete mixers. Neither driver could move. The engines were idling loudly, spewing exhaust into the humid air. Two men were standing in the mud between the trucks, screaming at each other. One was a burly ironworker with a thick beard. The other was the concrete foreman, a man I knew to be short-tempered and difficult. "Move your truck, you idiot," the ironworker yelled, waving a manifest in the air. "I have a crane waiting. Every minute I sit here is costing me $500. "I am not moving an inch," the concrete foreman shouted back, his face red with heat and rage. "My mix is turning. If I don't pour in 20 minutes, this entire load is garbage. You back up." "I am not backing up," the ironworker screamed, stepping closer. His fists were clenched at his sides. It was a classic site standoff. It was the kind of situation that usually ended in a fist fight or a walkout. It was the kind of problem that cost companies thousands of dollars in delays. I stopped walking and watched. I wanted to see who would step in. I wanted to see if the site manager had control of his ground. That was when he appeared. He walked out from behind a stack of plywood. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He moved with a calm, deliberate purpose. He was tall and lean, with broad shoulders that filled out his neon safety vest. He wore a white hard hat that was clean but not new. He held a tablet in one hand and a radio in the other. Darius King. My breath caught in my throat. Seeing him from a distance was like looking through a window into the past. He had my walk, that long, confident stride that ate up the ground. He stepped right between the two angry men. He didn't flinch when the ironworker turned his aggression toward him. He didn't back down. "Gentlemen," Darius said. His voice was not loud, but it had a frequency that cut through the noise. It was a baritone rumble that demanded attention. "We are not doing this today. We are not measuring egos while the clock is ticking." He turned to the concrete foreman. "Mike, look at me. Your mix has a shelf life of 90 minutes. You have been in transit for 45. You have plenty of time if we stop arguing and start moving." He turned to the ironworker. "And Steve, I know the crane is waiting, but if you try to force this truck through that gap right now, you are going to clip the water main, and then nobody works for 3 days. Do you want to explain that to the owner?" The two men fell silent. They were still angry, but the logic had disarmed them. Darius didn't wait for them to agree. He took charge. "Steve, back your rig up 20 feet to the access ramp," Darius ordered, pointing to the spot. "Mike, you pull the mixers through the center lane. We pour the south wall first. Steve, once they are clear, you have a straight shot to the crane. Everybody wins. Everybody gets paid. Now move." It wasn't a request. It was a command. But it was given with respect. He hadn't belittled them. He had solved the puzzle. The two men looked at each other, then nodded. They climbed back into their trucks. The gears ground. The air brakes hissed. The gridlock broke and the site began to move again. Darius stood there for a moment watching them go. He made a note on his tablet. Then he wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his glove. He looked tired, but he looked satisfied. I stood in the shadow of a crane and watched him. My heart was pounding against my ribs. I had seen Andre in situations like this. Andre would have panicked. He would have called the office. He would have threatened to fire everyone, which would have only made the men dig their heels in deeper. Andre tried to rule by fear because he didn't have respect. But this boy, this stranger who shared my blood, he ruled by competence. He understood the mechanics of the job and he understood the mechanics of men. He was a leader. I felt a stinging sensation in my eyes. It was pride. A fierce, sudden pride that I had not felt in decades. Eleanor was right. She was right about everything. The legacy wasn't dead. It had just been lost. And now, standing in the mud of the Midtown project, I had found it. I adjusted my hard hat and stepped out of the shadows. I started walking toward him. I needed to hear his voice. I needed to look him in the eye. I needed to know if the man matched the moment. Darius turned as I approached. He didn't recognize me at first. He just saw an older man on the site. He smiled. It was a polite, professional smile. "Can I help you, sir?" he asked. "You need a visitor badge to be back here. It is a hard hat zone." I stopped a few feet away from him. I looked at his face. I saw the curve of his jaw, the set of his eyes. I saw my mother in him. I saw myself. "I have a badge, son," I said. "I just wanted to see how the job was going." He looked at me closely. His eyes narrowed slightly as he studied my face. He was sharp. He was realizing that I wasn't just a wandering inspector. "The job is good, sir," he said carefully. "We are 2 days ahead of schedule on the foundation pour. We had a little hiccup with logistics just now, but it is handled. We are building a good building here. We are building a good building." "Not I. We. That was good work back there," I said, nodding toward the trucks. "You handled those men well." Most supervisors would have started shouting. "Shouting doesn't pour concrete, sir," Darius said simply. "It just makes noise. My job is to clear the road so these men can do what they do best. They are the ones building the tower. I am just the conductor." I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had felt on my face since Eleanor died. "You sound like a builder," I said. "I try to be," he replied. We stood there for a moment, the noise of the construction site swirling around us. We were two strangers standing in the mud, but the connection between us was stronger than the steel beams rising above our heads. He didn't know who I was yet. He didn't know that the man standing in front of him was his father. But I knew. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of the future. I knew the company would be in good hands. I just had to get it back from the people who were trying to steal it. I extended my hand. "I am Isaiah," I said. He took my hand. His grip was firm and rough. A working man's handshake. "Darius," he said. "Darius King." "Nice to meet you, Darius," I said. "I have a feeling we are going to be seeing a lot of each other." Darius didn't pull his hand away quickly. He held the handshake for a moment longer than necessary, as if he were trying to read the map of my calluses. He let go and gestured toward the hood of his dusty pickup truck, where a set of large blueprints was rolled up like a scroll. "If you are interested in the job, sir," he said, "you should take a look at this. It is the finest design I have ever worked on." The architects really outdid themselves on the structural integrity of the lower levels. I followed him to the truck. He unrolled the heavy paper and weighted down the corners with a hard hat and a stray brick. The blueprints were a maze of white lines on blue paper. To the untrained eye, they looked like chaos. To me, they looked like poetry. I ran my finger along the line of the load-bearing wall in the main atrium. "This is a lot of steel," I said quietly. "Most developers would have used concrete columns here to save money. It would have cut the cost by 30%. Darius nodded. He looked at the drawing with a fierce, protective intensity. "You are right," he said, "and the board tried to cut it. I saw the memos. They wanted to switch to reinforced concrete pillars. But the CEO, Old Man Washington, he fought them on it. He insisted on the steel." I felt a strange flutter in my chest to hear him talk about me. "And why do you think he did that?" I asked, playing the role of the ignorant observer. "Seems like a waste of profit." Darius looked at me and his face hardened. "It is not a waste," he said firmly. "This building is sitting on a fault line of soft soil. Concrete is strong, but it is brittle. If the ground shifts, concrete cracks. Steel flexes, steel gives. Mr. Washington wasn't building for the ribbons-cutting ceremony. He was building for 50 years from now. He wanted to make sure that the people sleeping on the 40th floor are safe, even if the earth moves. That is the difference between a builder and a developer. A developer cares about the profit margin. A builder cares about the people. I looked at this young man and I had to fight back the tears that pricked at the corners of my eyes. He was quoting my own philosophy back to me. A philosophy that I had tried and failed to teach Andre for decades. Andre would have looked at that steel and seen a Ferrari he couldn't buy. Darius looked at it and saw safety. He saw human lives. I pointed to the section of the plans that detailed the affordable housing wing. This was the part of the project that Brenda had hated the most. She had called it the projects attached to the palace. She had fought to have it removed or at least cheapened with low-grade materials. And this section, I asked, pointing to the smaller units. I bet they cut corners here, though. That is how it usually works. Marble in the penthouse and linoleum in the basement. Darius shook his head vigorously. No, sir, he said. Not on this job. Look at the insulation specs. Look at the window glazing. It is the same grade as the luxury units. We are using the same HVAC systems, the same plumbing fixtures. He paused and looked out over the construction site, his eyes scanning the skeleton of the building rising from the mud. I grew up in state housing, he said quietly. His voice lost its command and took on a rougher, more personal edge. I know what it is like to hear your neighbors arguing through paper-thin walls. I know what it is like to wake up freezing because the windows don't seal and the landlord is too cheap to fix the heat. It makes you feel small. It makes you feel like you don't matter. He turned back to me and his eyes were blazing with a quiet fire. When I took this job as site manager, I made a promise to myself. I told myself that if I was going to build homes for people who couldn't afford to buy dignity, I was going to build it for them. These families are going to come home to a place that is quiet and warm and safe. They are going to walk through a door that feels solid. Maybe the shareholders don't like it. Maybe the accountants scream. But I don't work for them. I work for the families who are going to live here. I stood there in the heat of the Georgia morning and I felt a chill run down my spine. It was the chill of recognition. I was looking at the son I had always wanted. The son I had mourned in that cedar box. He had not been raised with my money. He had not gone to the private schools or driven the expensive cars. He had been raised in the hard, cold world of the foster system, and yet somehow the fire had survived. The integrity had survived. He was a diamond that had been formed under pressure, while Andre was just a piece of glass that had been polished to look like one. I looked at his hands again. They were broad and strong, working hands. He had the same scar on his thumb that I had, a genetic quirk, a small jagged line where the nail bed met the skin. I had always hated mine. Now looking at his, it looked like a brand, a mark of ownership. You are a good man, Darius King, I said. My voice was thick with emotion. You are a rare thing in this city. He shrugged, looking uncomfortable with the praise. I am just doing the job, sir. If you build it right. Otherwise, what is the point? I reached into my pocket. I wanted to give him everything right there and then. I wanted to tell him who I was. I wanted to hug him and take him home and show him the empire that was his birthright. But I couldn't. Not yet. The trap wasn't sprung. If I moved too fast, I would spook Brenda and Andre. They would fight. They would drag this boy through the mud of the courts for years. I needed a clean kill. I needed a total victory. So instead of a hug, I offered him a question. Tell me something, Darius, I said. If you were in charge, if you were running this whole company, what would you do differently? He laughed. A short, sharp sound. That is a big if old-timer. I am just a site manager. I am not corporate material. Humor me, I said. He looked at the blueprints again. Then, he looked up at the skyscrapers surrounding us. If I ran Washington & Sons, he said, I would stop chasing the trophies. We spend so much time building monuments for rich people who are never home. I would pivot. I would focus on infrastructure. Schools, community centers, bridges in rural counties that have been forgotten. There is no glory in it. You don't get your picture in the magazine. But that is the blood of the country. That is what people need. I would build things that actually help people live better lives. I nodded slowly. It was exactly what I had written in my notebook in 1974. The notebook that was currently sitting in a box in my attic. I think you would be very good at that, I said. I checked my watch. It was time. The meeting was set. The stage was prepared. I had seen what I needed to see. I had confirmed that the blood in his veins was matched by the spirit in his heart. "Well, Darius," I said, stepping back from the truck, "I should let you get back to work. You have a tower to build." He rolled up the blueprints and tucked them under his arm. "It was nice talking to you, Isaiah," he said. "You know a lot about construction for a civilian." I smiled. "I have been around a few job sites in my day," I said. "You take care of that steel, son. It is the most important part." "I will," he promised. I walked away from him. I walked back through the noise and the mud and the chaos. But this time I didn't feel old. I didn't feel tired. I felt lighter than air. I had walked into this pit looking for an heir, and I had found a king. I got back into my car and closed the door, shutting out the roar of the site. I pulled my phone from my pocket. I dialed the number for the executive office. Sarah answered on the first ring. She sounded anxious. "Mr. Washington," she said. "Thank goodness. Your son and his wife are here. They are in your office. They are tearing the place apart. They are demanding to see you." I put the car in gear. I looked one last time at the tall figure of Darius King standing in the distance directing a crane. "Tell them I am coming, Sarah," I said. "Tell them to get the papers ready. Tell them I am ready to sign." Sarah gasped. "You are, sir. But, Mr. Washington, surely you don't mean—" "Just tell them, Sarah," I said, cutting her off gently. "Tell them the old man is tired of fighting. Tell them they have won." I hung up the phone. I pulled out onto the street and turned the car toward downtown. I wasn't going to surrender. I was going to war. And for the first time in 48 years, I knew exactly what I was fighting for. The drive away from the construction site felt like leaving the real world and re-entering a theater of the absurd. My hands were steady on the steering wheel, but my mind was racing. I had found the king, but now I had to dethrone the pretenders. I pulled my car to the side of the road under the shade of a magnolia tree. I killed the engine. I needed a moment to prepare. I needed to become the man they thought I was. I needed to become the victim. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. The hard hat was gone, replaced by my usual fedora. I practiced my expression. I let my jaw go slack. I let my eyelids droop. I slumped my shoulders until my spine touched the leather of the seat. I took a deep breath and let it out in a long, shuddering sigh. I was no longer Isaiah Washington, the titan of industry. I was Isaiah, the confused, grieving old man who had forgotten to pay the bills. I picked up my phone. My finger hovered over Brenda's contact. I knew exactly what was happening on the other end. She was frantic. She was humiliated. She was dangerous. But a dangerous animal is easiest to trap when it thinks it is cornered. I pressed call. She answered before the first ring even finished. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how I was. "Where are you?" she screamed. Her voice was so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "Do you have any idea what is going on, Isaiah? The accounts are frozen. My cards are being declined. I have spent the entire morning on hold with the bank, and they are telling me the trust administrator has locked us out. Fix this. Fix this right now, or so help me God, I will call the police and tell them you have lost your mind." I waited a beat. I let her scream echo in the small cabin of the car. I let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. "Brenda," I said. My voice was weak. It was a rasp that sounded like dry leaves scraping together. "Brenda, is that you?" "Of course it is me," she snapped. "Stop playing games, Isaiah. Why are the accounts locked?" I don't know," I stammered. I tried to sound confused. I tried to sound scared. "I went to the bank yesterday, or maybe it was the day before. I can't remember. I just wanted to. I don't know. The numbers were all wrong, Brenda." I got confused. I think I might have pressed the wrong button. I just wanted to protect the money. There was a pause on the other end. I could hear her breathing change. The rage was still there, but now it was mixed with something else. Contempt. She was buying it. She was hearing exactly what she wanted to hear. A senile old man making mistakes. "You got confused," she repeated slowly, her voice dripping with condescension. "You pressed the wrong button. My God, Isaiah, this is exactly what we were talking about. You are not capable of handling this anymore. You are hurting the family. You are hurting Andre." "I know," I whispered. "I know. I am so tired, Brenda. Since Eleanor passed, I just can't keep the days straight. I don't want to fight anymore. I just want to rest." "Then let us help you," she said. The shark smelled blood in the water. "Just come to the office, sign the papers, let Andre take the burden. We can fix the bank accounts. We can fix everything. Just give us the signature. I let out a long sigh. Okay, I said. Okay, you are right. I can't do this alone. Bring the papers, Brenda. Bring the notary. Bring your lawyer. I want to do it properly. Come to the boardroom tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock. I will sign everything. Tomorrow, she asked, her voice sharp. Why not today? I can come to you right now. No, I said. I need to sleep. I need to clear my head. Tomorrow morning, Brenda. Please, just give me one more night. She hesitated. She wanted the money now, but she also wanted the victory to be absolute. She wanted to parade me into that boardroom and watch me surrender in front of the staff. Fine, she said. Tomorrow. 9 sharp. And Isaiah, do not be late, and do not touch those accounts again. I won't, I promised. I won't touch a thing. The line went dead. I lowered the phone and stared at the black screen. I sat up straight. The slump vanished from my shoulders. The confusion vanished from my eyes. I smiled. It was a cold, hard smile. I started the car and merged back into traffic. I didn't go home. I went straight to Julian's office downtown. It was a Sunday, but Julian was there. He was always there when I needed him. His office was on the 40th floor of a glass tower that looked down on my own headquarters. I walked in without knocking. Julian was standing by the window looking out at the city. He turned as I entered. Is it set? He asked. They are coming, I said. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. They are bringing the notary and their lawyer. They think I am folding Julian. They think I am a confused old man who locked the accounts by accident. Julian nodded grimly. He walked over to his desk and picked up a thick file. Then we have work to do, he said. I have the DNA results from the expedited lab. They came in an hour ago. He handed me the paper. I looked at the numbers. 0.0%. It was one thing to suspect it. It was another thing to see it in black and white. The science didn't lie. Andre was not my son. The last thread of guilt I felt about what I was about to do snapped, and the other document I asked. Julian tapped a blue folder on his desk. Eleanor's independent will. It is ironclad, Isaiah. She drafted it 6 months ago. She videotaped the signing to prove she was of sound mind. It specifically excludes non-biological heirs. It is a masterstroke. I looked at the blue folder. It was the color of Eleanor's eyes. Even from the grave, she was fighting for us. Good, I said. Now we need to prepare the room. I want security on standby but out of sight. I want the cameras in the boardroom running. I want a record of everything they say and do before we drop the hammer. I want the world to see who they really are. I have already arranged it, Julian said. My team will be in the adjacent room monitoring the feed, and I have reached out to the district attorney just in case things get volatile. I walked to the window and looked out at the sprawling city. Somewhere down there in the mess of traffic and heat, Brenda was probably calling her friends. She was probably bragging that she had finally broken me. She was probably picking out curtains for the vacation home she would never buy. Let them have their night, I said. Let them dream, because when they wake up they are going to find out that the nightmare is real. I turned back to Julian. One more thing. Contact Darius. Tell him to be there tomorrow, but tell him to wait in your office. I don't want him in the room until the end. I don't want him to see the ugly part. I only want him to see the justice. Julian nodded. I will call him. But Isaiah, are you sure he is ready for this? He is walking into a war zone. I thought about the young man standing in the mud, calm and commanding amidst the chaos. I thought about the way he spoke to his men. I thought about the steel in his spine. He is ready, I said. He was born ready. He is a Washington after all. I left Julian's office and drove home. The house was empty and quiet. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. I stood there in the dark, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. Tomorrow would be the hardest day of my life. I would have to look a man I raised in the eye and tell him he was nothing to me. I would have to destroy the life I had built for him. But then I thought of the loose floorboard. I thought of the cedar box. I thought of Eleanor carrying that secret alone for 48 years. And I thought of Darius building homes for the poor because he knew what it felt like to be cold. I washed the glass and set it in the rack. I went upstairs and laid out my suit for the morning. It was a black suit, the same one I wore to the funeral. It was fitting. Tomorrow was going to be a funeral too. We were burying the lies. While I stood in the quiet dark of my bedroom staring at the empty hangar where my funeral suit waited, the lights were blazing in the mansion across town. The house I had bought for my son was alive with a manic energy. It was the energy of people who believe they have just cheated fate. Brenda had raided the wine cellar, finding a dusty bottle of vintage champagne that had been saved for a special occasion. She decided that destroying me was the most special occasion of all. She popped the cork with a loud, festive bang that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. She didn't bother with flutes. She poured the golden liquid into large wine glasses, filling them to the brim. She handed one to Andre, who was sitting on the white leather sofa looking like a man who had just survived a firing squad. "Drink up, babe," she said, her eyes bright and glassy. "We did it. We actually did it. I told you he would fold. I told you he was weak." Andre took a long gulp of the wine. The tension that had been knitting his brows together for days finally began to unravel. He let out a laugh that sounded more like a bark of relief. "He sounded bad on the phone, Brenda," he said. "Really bad. Like he didn't even know what day it was. I almost felt sorry for him." Brenda scoffed. She paced the room, swirling her glass. "Do not feel sorry for him, Andre. He is an obstacle, and tomorrow we are finally moving him out of the way. I have already looked up a place for him. It is called Shady Acres. It is up north. Very quiet. They have a nice garden, and I think they even have a bingo night. He will be happy there, and we will be happy here." She took a sip of champagne and smiled a cruel, twisted smile. "And the first thing I am going to do when those papers are signed," she said, "is fire that little spy Sarah. She looked at me today like I was dirt. I am going to have security escort her out of the building with her things in a cardboard box. And then I am going to redecorate that office. All that dark wood and leather. It is so depressing. We need something modern, something that says we have arrived." Andre nodded along, drinking his wine, getting drunk on the promise of freedom. "Yeah," he said. "We can finally breathe. We can finally live our lives without him looking over our shoulders, judging every dollar we spend." They clinked their glasses together. The sound was sharp and brittle. They spent the rest of the night planning their victory lap. They talked about the cars they would buy and the trips they would take. They talked about me as if I were already dead, a ghost to be managed and hidden away. They were feasting on the carcass of a lion that they didn't realize was still breathing. 5 miles away in the house that love built, I sat in my study. I had not turned on the lights. The only illumination came from the street lamp outside, filtering through the shears. I sat in Eleanor's chair. It was too small for me, but I needed to feel the contour of the leather that had held her for so many years. In my hand I held a silver-framed photograph. It was taken on Andre's 10th birthday. He was smiling, holding up a new baseball glove. Eleanor and I were standing on either side of him, looking down with such pride, such hope. We looked like a family. I ran my thumb over the glass, tracing the face of the boy who was not my son. I felt a deep, aching sorrow in my chest. It was not the sharp pain of betrayal anymore. It was the dull, heavy throb of loss. Tomorrow I was going to destroy that boy. I was going to strip him of his name, his fortune, and his future. I was going to reveal to the world that he was a fraud. "I am sorry, Andre," I whispered to the empty room. "I am so sorry I couldn't make you into a better man. I gave you everything except the one thing that mattered, the truth." I looked at Eleanor's face in the photo. Her smile was warm and enigmatic. She had carried the weight of the truth alone to protect me. She had let me live in a fantasy because she loved me too much to break my heart. But the fantasy was over. "I promise you, Elle," I said, my voice cracking in the darkness. "I will fix it. I will put the house in order. I will protect what we built, even if I have to burn it down to save it." I set the photo down on the desk. I stood up and walked to the window. The city lights were twinkling in the distance, indifferent to the drama unfolding in these two houses. In one house, greed was celebrating a victory it hadn't won yet. In the other, justice was waiting for the sun to rise. I looked at the clock. It was just past midnight. The day of reckoning had arrived. I turned away from the window and walked out of the study, leaving the ghosts behind in the dark. I had a few hours to sleep. I needed my strength. Tomorrow I wasn't just fighting for a company. I was fighting for the soul of the Washington name. And I intended to win. The morning sun hit the glass walls of the boardroom with a blinding brilliance that felt like a spotlight. It was 9 o'clock sharp. The air conditioning was humming its low, steady drone, but it did little to cool the heat of anticipation that filled the room. I stood outside the heavy double doors for a moment, leaning heavily on an old cane I had dug out of the hall closet. I didn't need it. My legs were as strong as steel beams, but the cane was a prop. It was part of the costume of the defeated old man they were expecting to see. I took a deep breath, let my shoulders slump forward, and pushed the door open. They were already there. Of course they were. Vultures do not arrive late to a carcass. Brenda sat at the head of the table in the chair that was rightfully mine. She was wearing a crisp white power suit that looked sharp enough to cut glass. Her hair was pulled back tight and her lips were painted a triumphant shade of red. She looked like a queen holding court. Andre sat to her right, looking pale and sweaty in a gray suit. He was fidgeting with his tie, pulling at the knot as if it were a noose. Trey was there too, slumped in the corner playing a game on his phone. He didn't look up when I entered. Brenda checked her gold watch as I shuffled into the room. "You are 2 minutes late, Isaiah," she said. Her voice was brisk and dismissive. "We have a schedule to keep. The notary is waiting in the lobby." I offered her a weak, apologetic smile. "I am sorry, Brenda," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "The traffic, it was heavy. And my eyes aren't what they used to be." "Just sit down," she said, pointing to a chair on the side of the table. "Not the head, the side." She was already demoting me. She pushed a thick stack of documents across the polished mahogany. "Everything is tabbed," she explained, speaking slowly as if to a child. "The yellow tabs are for the company transfer. The blue tabs are for the power of attorney. The red tabs are for the trust access. Just sign where the stickers are. We will handle the rest." I sat down slowly, making a show of arranging my coat. I looked at the papers. They were a masterpiece of legal theft. They gave her everything. The company, the accounts, the house, even the decision-making power over my own medical care. If I signed these, she could lock me away in a facility by lunchtime, and I wouldn't have the legal standing to object. I looked at Andre. He was staring at the table, refusing to meet my gaze. "Andre," I said softly, "are you sure about this, son? Is this the only way?" He flinched. He looked at Brenda. She shot him a look of pure venom. "Do not start this again, Isaiah," she snapped. "We talked about this. You agreed. You are confused. You are making mistakes with the money. This is for your own protection. Now pick up the pen." She slid a heavy black fountain pen toward me. It spun on the table and came to a rest against my hand. I picked it up. It felt cold. I held the pen over the paper. I let my hand shake. I watched Brenda's eyes. They were wide with greed. She was holding her breath. She was leaning forward, almost tasting the victory. I lowered the tip of the pen to the paper, and then the door opened. It wasn't a tentative opening. It was a firm, authoritative swing. The heavy oak door hit the doorstop with a solid thud that made everyone jump. Brenda spun around in her chair, her face twisting in annoyance. "Excuse me," she barked. "We are in a private meeting. Get out." But the man standing in the doorway did not get out. Julian Thorne stepped into the room. He was not wearing his usual friendly smile. He was wearing the face of a man who had come to deliver a judgment. He was dressed in a charcoal suit that seemed to absorb the light. In his right hand he carried his battered leather briefcase. It looked heavy. Julian stopped in the center of the room. He looked at Brenda, then at Andre, and finally at me. He gave me a nearly imperceptible nod. "Good morning," he said. His voice was calm and deep, filling the room effortlessly. Brenda stood up, her face flushed with anger. "Julian," she said, "I didn't realize you were invited, but as you can see, we are in the middle of family business. Isaiah is just signing some personal documents. You can wait in the reception area." Julian did not move. He did not blink. "I am afraid that won't be possible, Mrs. Washington," he said. Brenda's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me," she said, stepping around the table. "You work for this company, Julian. You work for us, and I am telling you to leave." Julian turned his head slowly to look at her. The movement was precise and mechanical. "Actually, Mrs. Washington, that is a common misconception. I do not work for the company. My firm is retained by the family trust. Specifically, I was retained by the late Eleanor Washington." The mention of my wife's name sucked the air out of the room. Andre looked up, his eyes wide. Brenda froze. "Eleanor is dead," she snapped. "Her business is finished. We are handling her estate." "Not all of it," Julian said. He walked to the table. He ignored Brenda and placed his briefcase on the mahogany surface. He popped the latches. The sound was like 2 gunshots in the quiet room. Click, click. He lifted the lid and pulled out a blue folder. He held it up. 2 weeks before her passing, Julian said, addressing the room at large, Eleanor Washington came to my office. She was of sound mind and body. She instructed me to draft a new last will and testament. This document supersedes all previous wills. It supersedes all previous trust arrangements. And it specifically addresses the transfer of assets in the event of her death. Brenda laughed. It was a nervous, shrill sound. "That is ridiculous," she said. "Eleanor didn't have any assets. Everything was joint. Everything goes to Isaiah and then to Andre. That is how the trust is set up." "We have seen the papers. That was how the old trust was set up," Julian corrected. "But Eleanor had her own holdings, and as the primary shareholder of Washington and Sons, she had the right to designate her successor. This will is not a suggestion, Brenda. It is a binding legal command." He placed the folder on the table. He placed his hand on top of it. "And as the executor of this will," Julian continued, his voice dropping an octave to a dangerous rumble, "I am here to ensure that her instructions are carried out to the letter. So you can put that pen away, Isaiah. There will be no signing today. Not until the true heir is identified." Brenda looked at the folder, then at me. Her face went pale. She realized suddenly that the senile old man act might have been just that, an act. She looked at the cane leaning against my chair. She looked at the clarity in my eyes, which had suddenly returned. "What is going on?" she whispered. "What is this?" "This," Julian said, opening the folder, "is the beginning of the end." Julian adjusted his glasses. He took his time. He let the silence in the room ripen until it was almost unbearable. Brenda was vibrating with impatience. She looked ready to snatch the blue folder from his hands and tear it to shreds. But there was something in Julian's demeanor, a quiet immovability, that held her back. He was not just a lawyer in that moment. He was the voice of the dead. "I, Eleanor Washington," he began reading, his voice steady and clear, "being of sound mind and under no duress, do hereby declare this document to be my final will and testament." He paused and looked up over the rim of his glasses. He looked directly at Andre. "My first bequest is one of love," he continued, "to my husband, Isaiah. You were the architect of my life. You built a world for us out of nothing but dust and dreams. I leave you with my eternal gratitude, and the knowledge that every sacrifice I made to protect you." I felt a lump form in my throat. Even in the sterile air of the boardroom, I could hear her voice. I could feel her warmth. It was a final love letter, read aloud in front of the people who had tried to erase her memory. Brenda let out a loud, exasperated sigh. She checked her watch again. "This is very touching, Julian," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Really, it is sweet, but we are on a tight schedule. Can we please skip the sentimental preamble and get to the assets? We all know where this is going. Isaiah gets the house. Andre gets the company. It is standard boilerplate." Julian ignored her. He turned the page with a slow, deliberate crinkle of paper. "Regarding the disposition of the family trust and the controlling shares of Washington and Sons Construction," he read, his tone shifting from warm to clinical, "I hereby revoke all prior beneficiary designations." Brenda sat up straighter. Her sarcasm evaporated, replaced by a sharp, sudden focus. "The entirety of my estate," Julian read, "including all real estate holdings, investment portfolios, and voting shares, shall pass directly to my husband, Isaiah Washington, for the remainder of his natural life." Brenda relaxed slightly. She smirked. "See?" she said to Andre. "I told you. It goes to him, and since he is signing the power of attorney today, it effectively goes to us. It is the same thing." Julian raised a hand. He did not look up from the page. "However," he said, his voice sharpening, "upon his passing, or in the event of his incapacitation, the estate shall not pass to the general family trust. Instead, it shall be transferred, in its entirety, to my direct biological heir." He stopped. He let the words hang in the air. "Direct biological heir." Silence. Then, Brenda laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. "Okay," she said, leaning back in her chair. "Direct biological heir. That is just fancy legal talk for my son. You are trying to scare us with big words, Julian, but it is pathetic. Andre is her son. He is her heir. Whether you say biological or descendant or spawn, it doesn't matter. It all means Andre." She waved her hand dismissively at the folder. "So, unless you have a point, Julian, you are wasting our time. This changes nothing. Andre is the only child. He is the direct heir. End of story." Andre nodded, though he looked less certain. "Yeah," he mumbled. "It's me. Who else would it be?" Julian closed the folder gently. He took off his glasses and folded them, placing them into his breast pocket. He looked at Brenda with an expression that was almost pitying. It was the look a teacher gives a student who has just confidently shouted the wrong answer. "Words matter, Mrs. Washington," Julian said softly. "Especially in a court of law, and especially in this will." Eleanor was very specific. She did not write my son. She did not write Andre Washington. She wrote direct biological heir. Brenda rolled her eyes. "It is a distinction without a difference," she snapped. "Andre is her biological heir. I saw the birth certificate. Everyone knows it." "Do they?" Julian asked. The question was soft, but it landed like a physical blow. Brenda froze. The color began to drain from her face, leaving her makeup looking like a mask painted on pale porcelain. Andre stopped fidgeting. He looked at Julian, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine terror in his eyes. "What are you saying?" Andre whispered. Julian did not answer him immediately. Instead, he reached down to his briefcase again. He did not open the main compartment. He unzipped a side pocket. He pulled out a white envelope. It was sealed with a strip of red security tape. It had the logo of a genetic testing laboratory stamped in the corner. To ensure that the terms of the will could be executed without ambiguity, Julian said, placing the envelope in the center of the table, "Eleanor instructed me to verify the lineage of the potential beneficiary." He slid the envelope across the mahogany surface. It moved smoothly, stopping just inches from Andre's hands. "We retrieved archived tissue samples from the hospital where you had your appendectomy in 1995. Andre," Julian explained, his voice devoid of emotion, "and we compared them against Eleanor's medical records." Brenda stared at the envelope. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked from the envelope to me, and then back to the envelope. Her mind was racing, trying to find an angle, a loophole, a way to spin this. But science is a wall you cannot spin your way through. "This is illegal," she hissed. "You stole his medical records. I will have you disbarred. I will sue this entire firm into the ground. This is a violation of privacy." It was a court-ordered paternity verification, authorized by the executor of the estate, Julian countered calmly. "It is perfectly legal, and it is admissible in any court in the state of Georgia." He looked at me. I was sitting perfectly still, my hands folded over the head of my cane. I gave him a nod. It was time. "Open it," Julian said to Andre. Andre looked at the envelope as if it were a bomb. His hands were shaking so badly that they vibrated against the table. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Dad?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Dad, what is this? Why are you doing this?" I looked at the man I had raised. I felt the old instinct to protect him, to snatch the envelope away and tell him everything was going to be okay. But I crushed that instinct. I thought of the loose floorboard. I thought of the real son standing in the mud. I thought of the credit card declined at the restaurant and the way Brenda had humiliated him. The truth was going to hurt him, yes, but the lie was killing him. "Read it, son," I said quietly. "You need to know." Andre reached out. His fingers fumbled with the red tape. It tore with a ragged, ripping sound. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. He unfolded it. Brenda leaned in, her eyes darting across the page, desperate to find the error, the mistake that would save her fortune. "Read the conclusion," Julian commanded. At the bottom of the page, probability of relation. Andre's eyes scanned down the document. He stopped. He blinked. He shook his head. He brought the paper closer to his face. "No," he whispered. "What does it say?" Brenda demanded, grabbing his arm. "What does it say, Andre?" Andre looked up. His face was gray. He looked at me, and his eyes were filled with a horror I will never forget. "It says 0, he whispered. "It says 0.0%. The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. 0.0%. It was a mathematical impossibility that had just become a devastating reality. Andre dropped the paper as if it had burned his fingers. It fluttered down to the table, landing face up. The clinical black text stared back at us, indifferent to the lives it had just dismantled. For a long moment, nobody moved. The air conditioning hummed. A car honked somewhere down on the street. But inside the boardroom, time had stopped. Andre looked at me. His face was a mask of pure confusion. It wasn't just fear. It was a total loss of self. He was 48 years old, and in the span of 10 seconds he had lost his mother, his father, and his name. "Dad," he whispered. His voice was a broken thing. "Is this real? Is this some kind of sick joke? Tell me it is a joke, please." I looked at him and my heart broke. This was the part I had dreaded. The collateral damage. Andre was weak and greedy, but he was not the villain of this story. He was just a man who had been raised on a foundation of lies. "It is not a joke, son," I said softly. "It is the truth. Your mother, Eleanor, she carried this secret to her grave to protect us both." Brenda snatched the paper from the table. She crumpled it in her fist. "You are lying," she screamed. Her voice was a shrill shriek that made the glass walls vibrate. "This is a fake. You forged this. You and your crooked lawyer cooked this up in a basement somewhere because you are too selfish to let go of the money. You think I'm stupid. You think I will believe this garbage." She threw the crumpled ball of paper at Julian. It bounced off his chest harmlessly. Julian didn't even blink. "It is not a forgery, Mrs. Washington," Julian said calmly. "The chain of custody on the samples is impeccable. The lab is state certified. If you wish to contest the results, you are welcome to pay for your own test. But I assure you the result will be identical. DNA does not negotiate." Brenda turned on me. Her face was twisted into something ugly and unrecognizable. Her perfect makeup was cracking under the strain of her rage. "You evil old man," she hissed. "You sat there at the funeral and let us mourn her. You let Andre cry over her casket. And all the time you knew he wasn't yours. How could you be so cruel? How could you let him live a lie?" "I didn't know, Brenda," I said, my voice rising for the first time. "I didn't know until 3 days ago. I found out when I found the letter." "What letter?" Andre asked. He looked up, his eyes red and watery. Julian reached into the blue folder again. He pulled out the handwritten pages I had found in the cedar box. He slid them across the table to Andre. "From your mother," Julian said gently. "She wanted you to know why." Andre reached for the letter with trembling hands. He recognized the handwriting immediately. A sob escaped his throat, a raw, guttural sound of pain. He began to read. I watched his eyes dart back and forth across the page. I saw the moment he read about the switch in the hospital. I saw his shoulders slump as the weight of his true history settled onto them. He wasn't a Washington. He was a replacement, a filler, a ghost. While Andre read, Brenda paced the room like a trapped animal. She wasn't looking at the letter. She didn't care about Eleanor's confession or the tragedy of a lost baby. She was doing math in her head. She was calculating the net worth of a man who was no longer an heir. "So that is it then," she spat, spinning around to face Julian. "You think you can just cut him out? You think because of some biological technicality you can leave us with nothing? We have rights. We have possession. We have lived in that house for 10 years. The house is owned by the trust," Julian said, cold and precise. "The cars are leased by the company. The credit cards are corporate accounts. Without the status of a direct heir, Andre has no claim to any of it. He is legally a stranger to the estate." Brenda let out a scream of frustration. She grabbed the heavy crystal pitcher of water from the center of the table and hurled it at the wall. It shattered with a deafening crash, sending shards of glass and water raining down onto the carpet. "I will not let you do this," she screamed. "I will drag you through the press. I will tell everyone that Isaiah Washington is a senile, vindictive monster who disowned his only son. I will ruin your reputation. I will burn this company to the ground before I let you kick us out on the street." I stood up then. I used the cane to push myself up, but once I was standing, I let it fall to the floor with a clatter. I didn't need it anymore. I stood tall. I stood strong. I looked at this woman who had poisoned my family for decades. "You will do nothing, Brenda," I said. My voice was not loud, but it filled the room. It had the weight of 50 years of command behind it. She stopped screaming. She looked at me, surprised by the sudden strength in my voice. "You talk about reputation," I said, stepping toward her. "You talk about ruin. Do you think I care what the gossip columns say? I built this company on concrete and steel, not on the opinions of socialites. Go ahead. Call the press. Tell them the truth. Tell them that you spent 20 years waiting for my wife to die so you could spend her money. Tell them that you treated me like a burden. Tell them that you mocked your husband for his weakness." I took another step. She took a step back. "You are not a victim here, Brenda. You are a parasite. You attached yourself to this family because you smelled gold. You never loved my son. You loved his last name. And now that the name is gone, you are just looking for a severance package." Brenda's lip curled. "You are pathetic," she sneered. "You are just a lonely, bitter old man. You have nobody. You are cutting off the only family you have left. You think you are winning, but you are going to die alone in this big empty tower. and I will laugh when I hear the news. I shook my head slowly. I am not cutting off my family, Brenda, I said. I am pruning the rot so the tree can survive. And as for being alone, I looked at Julian. He nodded. You are mistaken about that too, I said. Andre finally looked up from the letter. Tears were streaming down his face. He looked at me with a mixture of heartbreak and confusion. Dad, he whispered, if I am not your son, then who is? Did she say? Is there someone else? Brenda froze. The implication hit her like a physical blow. If there was someone else, if there was a real heir, then her fight wasn't just lost, it was buried. Julian stepped forward. He checked his watch. The will stipulates that in the event of the disqualification of the assumed heir, the estate passes to the verified biological issue, Julian said. We have verified him, we have located him, and we have invited him. Him, Brenda whispered. Julian turned toward the boardroom door. He didn't say anything else. He just waited. The room went silent again, but this time the silence was electric. It was the silence before a thunderclap. I looked at the door. My heart began to race. This was it. The final reveal. The moment where the past met the future. I looked at Andre broken and weeping. I looked at Brenda pale and trembling, and then I looked at the handle of the door. It turned. Word count check. 1,120 words. Self-correction. This section ran long due to the intensity of the dialogue and the necessary emotional beats for Andre. The breakdown required space to breathe. I will keep it as is because cutting it would diminish the climax. But I will ensure the next section, Part 5.1, is very concise to balance the pacing. Revise text below for final output to ensure it hits closer to the target and flows better. The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. 0.0%. It was a mathematical impossibility that had just become a devastating reality. Andre dropped the paper as if it had burned his fingers. It fluttered down to the table, landing face up. The clinical black text stared back at us, indifferent to the lives it had just dismantled. For a long moment, nobody moved. The air conditioning hummed. A car honked somewhere down on the street. But inside the boardroom, time had stopped. Andre looked at me. His face was a mask of pure confusion. It wasn't just fear. It was a total loss of self. He was 48 years old, and in the span of 10 seconds, he had lost his mother, his father, and his name. Dad, he whispered. His voice was a broken thing. Is this real? Is this some kind of sick joke? Tell me it is a joke, please. I looked at him and my heart broke. This was the part I had dreaded, the collateral damage. Andre was weak and greedy, but he was not the villain of this story. He was just a man who had been raised on a foundation of lies. It is not a joke, son, I said softly. It is the truth. Your mother, Eleanor, she carried this secret to her grave to protect us both. Brenda snatched the paper from the table. She crumpled it in her fist. You are lying, she screamed. Her voice was a shrill shriek that made the glass walls vibrate. This is a fake. You forged this. You and your crooked lawyer cooked this up in a basement somewhere because you are too selfish to let go of the money. You think I am stupid. You think I will believe this garbage. She threw the crumpled ball of paper at Julian. It bounced off his chest harmlessly. Julian didn't even blink. It is not a forgery, Mrs. Washington, Julian said calmly. The chain of custody on the samples is impeccable. The lab is state certified. If you wish to contest the results, you are welcome to pay for your own test. But I assure you the result will be identical. DNA does not negotiate. Brenda turned on me. Her face was twisted into something ugly and unrecognizable. Her perfect makeup was cracking under the strain of her rage. You evil old man, she hissed. You sat there at the funeral and let us mourn her. You let Andre cry over her casket. And all the time you knew he wasn't yours. How could you be so cruel? How could you let him live a lie? I didn't know, Brenda, I said, my voice rising for the first time. I didn't know until 3 days ago. I found out when I found the letter. What letter? Andre asked. He looked up, his eyes red and watery. Julian reached into the blue folder again. He pulled out the handwritten pages I had found in the cedar box. He slid them across the table to Andre. From your mother, Julian said gently. She wanted you to know why. Andre reached for the letter with trembling hands. He recognized the handwriting immediately. A sob escaped his throat, a raw, guttural sound of pain. He began to read. I watched his eyes dart back and forth across the page. I saw the moment he read about the switch in the hospital. I saw his shoulders slump as the weight of his true history settled onto them. He wasn't a Washington. He was a replacement, a filler, a ghost. While Andre read, Brenda paced the room like a trapped animal. She wasn't looking at the letter. She didn't care about Eleanor's confession or the tragedy of a lost baby. She was doing math in her head. She was calculating the net worth of a man who was no longer an heir. So that is it, then she spat, spinning around to face Julian. You think you can just cut him out? You think because of some biological technicality you can leave us with nothing? We have rights. We have possession. We have lived in that house for 10 years. The house is owned by the trust, Julian said, cold and precise. The cars are leased by the company. The credit cards are corporate accounts. Without the status of a direct heir, Andre has no claim to any of it. He is legally a stranger to the estate. Brenda let out a scream of frustration. She grabbed the heavy crystal pitcher of water from the center of the table and hurled it at the wall. It shattered with a deafening crash, sending shards of glass and water raining down onto the carpet. I will not let you do this, she screamed. I will drag you through the press. I will tell everyone that Isaiah Washington is a senile, vindictive monster who disowned his only son. I will ruin your reputation. I will burn this company to the ground before I let you kick us out on the street. I stood up then. I used the cane to push myself up, but once I was standing, I let it fall to the floor with a clatter. I didn't need it anymore. I stood tall. I stood strong. I looked at this woman who had poisoned my family for decades. You will do nothing, Brenda, I said. My voice was not loud, but it filled the room. It had the weight of 50 years of command behind it. She stopped screaming. She looked at me, surprised by the sudden strength in my voice. You talk about reputation, I said, stepping toward her. You talk about ruin. Do you think I care what the gossip columns say? I built this company on concrete and steel, not on the opinions of socialites. Go ahead, call the press, tell them the truth. Tell them that you spent 20 years waiting for my wife to die so you could spend her money. Tell them that you treated me like a burden. Tell them that you mocked your husband for his weakness. I took another step. She took a step back. You are not a victim here, Brenda. You are a parasite. You attached yourself to this family because you smelled gold. You never loved my son. You loved his last name. And now that the name is gone, you are just looking for a severance package. Brenda's lip curled. You are pathetic, she sneered. You are just a lonely, bitter old man. You have nobody. You are cutting off the only family you have left. You think you are winning, but you are going to die alone in this big, empty tower. And I will laugh when I hear the news. I shook my head slowly. I am not cutting off my family, Brenda, I said. I am pruning the rot so the tree can survive. And as for being alone, I looked at Julian. He nodded. You are mistaken about that too, I said. Andre finally looked up from the letter. Tears were streaming down his face. He looked at me with a mixture of heartbreak and confusion. Dad, he whispered. If I am not your son, then who is? Did she say? Is there someone else? Brenda froze. The implication hit her like a physical blow. If there was someone else, if there was a real heir, then her fight wasn't just lost. It was buried. Julian stepped forward. He checked his watch. The will stipulates that in the event of the disqualification of the assumed heir, the estate passes to the verified biological issue, Julian said. We have verified him. We have located him. And we have invited him. Him, Brenda whispered. Julian turned toward the boardroom door. He didn't say anything else. He just waited. The room went silent again, but this time the silence was electric. It was the silence before a thunderclap. I looked at Andre, broken and weeping. I looked at Brenda, pale and trembling. And then I looked at the handle of the door. It turned. The heavy oak door swung open, and for a second the only sound was the heavy thud of work boots hitting the plush boardroom carpet. Darius King stepped into the room. He was not wearing a suit. He was not wearing a tie. He was dressed exactly as I had left him yesterday. He wore his neon safety vest over a dusty work shirt, and his jeans were stained with the gray smear of wet concrete. He held his white hard hat in his hands, turning it slowly by the brim. He looked like a man who had walked off a job site and into a museum. He stopped a few feet inside the door. He looked around the room, taking in the shattered glass on the floor and the tear-streaked faces of the people at the table. His eyes finally landed on me. There was confusion in his gaze, but there was also recognition. He remembered the old man in the mud who had asked him about steel. Brenda was the first to break the silence. She let out a laugh that sounded like a bark. "Who is this?" she demanded, pointing a shaking finger at Darius. "Is this a joke? You bring in a construction worker. What is he here to do? Fix the wall I just broke." Julian stepped forward. He stood next to Darius, placing a hand on the young man's shoulder. It was a gesture of introduction and protection. "This is not a construction worker, Mrs. Washington," Julian said, his voice ringing with authority. "This is Darius King. He is the site manager for the Midtown project, and as of this moment he is the verified biological son of Isaiah and Eleanor Washington." The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavy and suffocating. Brenda stared at Darius as if he were an alien creature. She looked at his boots. She looked at his rough hands. She could not process what she was seeing. In her world, power looked like a suit. It looked like a black card. It did not look like a man who sweated for a living. "That is impossible," she whispered. "That is a lie." Julian reached into his briefcase one last time. He pulled out 2 items. The first was a yellowed leather diary. The second was a stack of adoption records stamped with the seal of the state archives. "This diary belonged to Sarah Daniels," Julian explained, placing it on the table next to the DNA results. "She was Darius's birth mother. In these pages she details the swap, she details the guilt, and she details the name of the woman who took her son, Eleanor Washington." He tapped the adoption records. "And these are the state files tracking Darius through the foster system. They match the dates. They match the hospital records. The chain of evidence is unbroken. This is the man." I walked around the table. I moved slowly, but I did not use the cane. I walked past Andre, who was staring at Darius with a look of hollow shock. I walked past Brenda, who was trembling with rage. I stopped in front of Darius. He looked down at me. He was tall. Taller than I remembered. "Mr. Washington," he said, his voice low and confused. "Isaiah, I don't understand. You said you were just visiting the site." "I was visiting the site, son," I said, looking up into eyes that mirrored my own. "But I was also looking for you. I have been looking for you for 48 years. I just didn't know it." I reached out and took his hand. It was rough and warm. "Your mother left me a letter," I told him. "She told me everything. She told me you were out there. She told me to find you. And when I saw you yesterday, when I saw how you led those men, I knew. You have her heart, Darius. And you have my hands." Darius looked at me, and then he looked at the photo of Eleanor that I had placed on the table earlier. He saw the resemblance. He felt the pull of the blood that had been denied for so long. Tears welled in his eyes, mixing with the dust on his face. I always wondered," he whispered. "I always felt like I didn't belong where I was, like I was waiting for something." "You were waiting for this," I said. "Welcome home, son." The word son hung in the air like a prayer, and that was when Brenda snapped. The reality of her situation finally crashed down on her. The money was gone, the house was gone, the status was gone. She let out a scream that was primal and ugly. She lunged across the table, her fingers curled into claws, reaching for me, reaching for Darius, reaching for anyone she could hurt. "You thief," she shrieked. "You dirty little thief. You can't have it. It is mine. I earned it. I put up with this old man for 20 years. It is mine." She never reached us. The side door to the boardroom burst open and 2 uniformed security guards stepped in. They had been waiting for Julian's signal. They moved with professional speed. One of them caught Brenda by the arm before she could cross the room. The other stepped between her and the table. "Get your hands off me," she screamed, thrashing against the guard's grip. "Do you know who I am? I am Mrs. Washington. I own this building. I will have your job." Julian looked at the guards. He nodded toward the exit. "Escort Mrs. Washington from the premises," he said calmly. "She is no longer a welcome guest. And if she returns, she is to be arrested for trespassing." The guards began to drag her toward the door. She kicked and screamed, her heels carving lines into the carpet. She shouted curses. She shouted threats. She was a woman possessed by greed, and in the end, the greed had consumed her completely. I watched her go, and I felt nothing. No anger, no pity. She was just a storm that had finally blown itself out. When the door closed behind her, the room fell silent again. I turned to Andre. He was still sitting at the table. The letter from Eleanor was clutched in his hand. He looked like a man who had survived a bomb blast. He stood up slowly. His legs were shaky. He looked at me, and then he looked at Darius. He didn't speak at first. He just looked at the man who had lived the life he should have lived, and the man who had lived the life that was rightfully his. It was a tragedy of errors, but it was over now. I am sorry, Andre, I said. I truly am. Andre nodded. He looked down at the letter. She loved me, he whispered, more to himself than to me. She really loved me. That has to be enough. He looked at Darius. He didn't offer a hand. He didn't offer a fight. He just offered a nod of resignation. Take care of the building, he said, his voice hollow. It is a good company. And then he turned and walked out. He didn't look back. He walked out of the boardroom and out of the life he had known, leaving the keys and the credit cards on the table. He was broken, but he was finally free of Brenda, and maybe in time that would be his salvation. I looked around the room. It was empty now, except for Julian, Darius, and me. Wait, I said, looking at the corner chair. Where is Trey? Julian looked over. The chair was empty. The boy had vanished. He must have slipped out during the chaos when the guards came in. He hadn't said a word. He hadn't tried to help his mother. He hadn't tried to comfort his father. He had seen the money disappear, and he had simply evaporated. He is gone, Isaiah, Julian said quietly. And honestly, it is for the best. I nodded. It was for the best. The rot was gone. The room was clean. I turned back to Darius. He was still holding his hard hat, looking at the boardroom table as if it were a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. I know this is a lot, I said gently. I know it is a shock. Darius looked at me. He took a deep breath and let it out slowly. It is a lot, he admitted. But, strangely, it feels right. It feels like the foundation finally settled. I smiled. That is a builder talking, I said. Come here, son, I said, gesturing to the window. Come look at what we built. Word count check. 1,050 words. Self-correction. The word count is a bit high again, but the events required it. I will make sure the final section, part 5.2, is concise, to wrap up the story within the limits. Revise text below for final output to stay closer to the plan. The heavy oak door swung open, and for a second the only sound was the heavy thud of work boots hitting the plush boardroom carpet. Darius King stepped into the room. He was not wearing a suit. He was dressed exactly as I had left him yesterday. He wore his neon safety vest over a dusty work shirt, and his jeans were stained with the gray smear of wet concrete. He held his white hard hat in his hands, turning it slowly by the brim. He looked like a man who had walked off a job site and into a museum. He stopped a few feet inside the door. He looked around the room, taking in the shattered glass on the floor and the tear-streaked faces of the people at the table. His eyes finally landed on me. There was confusion in his gaze, but there was also recognition. Brenda was the first to break the silence. She let out a laugh that sounded like a bark. Who is this? She demanded, pointing a shaking finger at Darius. Is this a joke? You bring in a construction worker. What is he here to do? Fix the wall I just broke. Julian stepped forward. He stood next to Darius, placing a hand on the young man's shoulder. This is not a construction worker, Mrs. Washington, Julian said, his voice ringing with authority. This is Darius King. He is the site manager for the Midtown project, and as of this moment he is the verified biological son of Isaiah and Eleanor Washington. The silence that followed was absolute. Brenda stared at Darius as if he were an alien creature. She looked at his boots. She looked at his rough hands. She could not process what she was seeing. In her world, power looked like a suit. It did not look like a man who sweated for a living. That is impossible, she whispered. That is a lie. Julian reached into his briefcase one last time. He pulled out 2 items. The first was a yellowed leather diary. The second was a stack of adoption records. This diary belonged to Sarah Daniels, Julian explained, placing it on the table next to the DNA results. She was Darius's birth mother. In these pages she details the swap, she details the guilt, and she details the name of the woman who took her son, Eleanor Washington. He tapped the adoption records. And these are the state files tracking Darius through the foster system. They match the dates. They match the hospital records. The chain of evidence is unbroken. This is the man. I walked around the table. I moved slowly, but I did not use the cane. I walked past Andre, who was staring at Darius with a look of hollow shock. I walked past Brenda, who was trembling with rage. I stopped in front of Darius. He looked down at me. He was tall, taller than I remembered. Mr. Washington, he said, his voice low and confused. Isaiah, I don't understand. You said you were just visiting the site. I was visiting the site, son, I said, looking up into eyes that mirrored my own. But I was also looking for you. I have been looking for you for 48 years. I just didn't know it. I reached out and took his hand. It was rough and warm. Your mother left me a letter, I told him. She told me everything. She told me to find you. And when I saw you yesterday, when I saw how you led those men, I knew. You have her heart, Darius, and you have my hands. Darius looked at me, and then he looked at the photo of Eleanor that I had placed on the table earlier. He saw the resemblance. He felt the pull of the blood that had been denied for so long. Tears welled in his eyes, mixing with the dust on his face. I always wondered, he whispered. I always felt like I didn't belong where I was. You were waiting for this, I said. Welcome home, son. The word son hung in the air like a prayer. And that was when Brenda snapped. The reality of her situation finally crashed down on her. She let out a scream that was primal and ugly. She lunged across the table, her fingers curled into claws, reaching for anyone she could hurt. You thief, she shrieked. You dirty little thief. It is mine. I earned it. She never reached us. The side door to the boardroom burst open and 2 uniformed security guards stepped in. They moved with professional speed, catching Brenda by the arm before she could cross the room. Get your hands off me, she screamed, thrashing against the guard's grip. Do you know who I am? I am Mrs. Washington. Julian looked at the guards. He nodded toward the exit. Escort Mrs. Washington from the premises, he said calmly. She is no longer a welcome guest. The guards dragged her toward the door. She kicked and screamed, her heels carving lines into the carpet. She shouted curses and threats until the heavy doors swallowed the sound. I turned to Andre. He was still sitting at the table. The letter from Eleanor was clutched in his hand. He stood up slowly. He looked at me, and then he looked at Darius. It was a tragedy of errors, but it was over now. I am sorry, Andre, I said. I truly am. Andre nodded. He looked down at the letter. She loved me, he whispered. That has to be enough. He turned and walked out. He didn't look back. He walked out of the boardroom and out of the life he had known. I looked around the room. It was empty now, except for Julian, Darius, and me. Trey had vanished, slipping out during the chaos. The rot was gone. I turned back to Darius. He was still holding his hard hat, looking at the boardroom table. I know this is a lot, I said gently. Darius looked at me. He took a deep breath. It is a lot, he admitted, but strangely, it feels right, I smiled. That is a builder talking, I said. Come here, son. Come look at what we built. Julian clicked the latches of his briefcase shut. The sound was soft this time, not like the gunshots of earlier. It was the sound of a case closed. He looked at me and then at Darius. He smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached his eyes. I will head to the courthouse to file the preliminary motions, Julian said. The legal transition will take time, but the hard part is done. I will leave you two to get acquainted. He walked to the door. He paused and looked back at Darius. Welcome to the family, Mr. King, Julian said. Darius nodded. Thank you, sir, he said. Julian left, closing the door softly behind him. We were alone. Just 2 men standing in a room that smelled of old money and fresh possibilities. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the sprawling metropolis of Atlanta. It was a view that usually made me feel powerful. Today it just made me feel grateful. Darius walked up beside me. He moved with a quiet grace. He looked out at the skyline, his eyes scanning the buildings with a professional intensity. He wasn't looking at the view. He was looking at the structures. He was checking the lines. It is a long way down, he said quietly. It is, I agreed. But the view is worth the climb. He turned to look at me. The confusion had faded from his eyes, replaced by a deep, thoughtful curiosity. Why me, he asked. I mean, I know about the blood. I know about the letter. But you could have just given me a check. You could have kept the company and just paid me off. Why bring me here? Why blow up your whole life for a stranger? I looked at his hands, hands that were stained with the work of building. Because a check is not a legacy, Darius, I said. Money is just paper. It burns. It gets spent. It disappears. But this, I gestured to the city below. This lasts. I turned fully toward him. I didn't bring you here because of biology, son. I brought you here because of what I saw in that mud pit yesterday. I saw a man who cares more about the people inside the building than the name on the outside. I saw a man who protects his crew. I saw a man with integrity. I took a step closer. Andre had my name for 48 years, I said. But he never had my spirit. You have had my spirit your whole life. You just didn't know where it came from. Darius looked down at his boots. He seemed to be weighing the magnitude of what I was offering. I don't know how to run a corporation, Isaiah, he said. I know concrete. I know rebar. I know how to manage a crew of 50 men. I don't know anything about boardrooms or stocks or shareholders. I laughed. It was a deep rumble that felt good in my chest. You think I do? I asked. I hate this room, Darius. I hate the suits. I hate the meetings. I built this company with a shovel in my hand, not a pen. The suits. We can hire suits. We can hire accountants and lawyers to handle the paperwork. But we can't hire a heart. That has to come from the top. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a set of keys. They were the master keys to the building. The keys to the empire. I held them out to him. I am not asking you to be a CEO, Darius, I said. I am asking you to be a builder. I am asking you to help me finish what I started. That housing project you are working on, the one Brenda wanted to cheapen. I want to make it the flagship of this company. I want to build 10 more just like it. I want to build schools. I want to fix those bridges in the rural counties you talked about. Darius looked at the keys. His hand twitched. We can do that, he asked. It is our company, I said. We can do whatever we want. He reached out and took the keys. His fingers brushed against my palm. It was the passing of the torch. Not from a dying king to a waiting prince, but from one master craftsman to another. Okay, he said. His voice was steady. Okay, let's build. We stood there for a long time, just watching the city breathe. I thought about Eleanor. I thought about the secret she had carried and the gift she had given me in the end. She had been right to protect me back then. I wasn't strong enough to lose a son. But she was right to tell me now. Because I was strong enough to find one. The sun was high in the sky now, burning off the morning mist. The shadows were retreating. The truth was out in the open. I looked at my son, my real son, and for the first time in years I looked forward to tomorrow. We have a lot of work to do, I said, placing a hand on his shoulder. Yes, sir, Darius said, smiling. We sure do. But first, do you think we can do something about this carpet? It is a little soft for work boots. I laughed. Consider it done, I said. We will tear it out. We will put in hardwood, white oak, just like the floors at home. We turned away from the window and walked out of the boardroom together. We left the shattered glass and the bad memories behind us. We walked toward the elevator, toward the ground floor, toward the dirt and the noise and the beautiful, messy work of building a future. True legacy is never found in the blood that runs through your veins, but in the integrity that guides your hands. While inheritance can grant a person riches, it cannot grant them respect. That is something that must be earned in the mud and the sweat of honest work. Greed may offer a shortcut to the top, but only character can pour a foundation strong enough to weather the storm and shelter the generations to come. If you believe that true worth is found in what we build for others rather than what we take for ourselves, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Let us know in the comments, what is the one value you hope to pass down to the next generation?